Welcome to today's webinar entitled The Promise of E-Commerce, Impacts on Retail and Industrial Real Estate. My name is Sandy Hudson and I will be your host. Today's presentation is based on a research project funded by the NAIOP Research Foundation. NAIOP's Research Foundation fosters building better communities through practical research and education that advances the quality and makes evident the benefits of commercial real estate ownership and development. These research projects support developers, owners, and others involved in commercial real estate to meet and exceed the needs and expectations of our communities now and in the future. Examples of completed research projects are listed on the current slide. For more information on the NAIOP Research Foundation or to view our completed research, please visit www.naiop.org/foundation. And now let's get on with our program. With us today is Steve Schellenberg, Vice President of Business Development for IMS Worldwide Incorporated. Steve has been involved in logistics, manufacturing, distribution, and transportation for over 30 years. His experience includes managing all aspects of the automotive supply chains, global distribution, and third-party logistics. He has extensive experience in the North America Free Trade Agreement trading regions and has managed air cargo, freight forwarding, and air charter operations. For the past 10 years, Steve has conducted assessments of global supply chains and has performed evaluations related to supply chain security enhancements, supply chain custody, and emerging radio frequency identification systems to identify container location, status, and condition. Welcome, Steve. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Sandy. And good morning or good afternoon to those of you who are attending. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about this increasingly complex and yet very interesting subject on the notion of e-commerce and how it affects us and how we use e-commerce and how it is changing the landscape of retail as well as the landscape of logistics, and clearly the landscape of industrial real estate. This is the second one of these activities we've participated with NAIOP. In 2012, we wrote a white paper for NAIOP on the borderless marketplace. Initially a study on what we thought the e-commerce industry was doing to retail and warehouse properties in the future, and we came back to NAIOP and said we'd like to update that. And so we created this new document that has just been published called The Promise of E-Commerce. And we use the word promise because there are several aspects to the promise that I'll talk about while we go through the webinar. And we use the word promise because it is very much the relationship that is established between the buyer and the retailer at the point where the e-commerce activity occurs. One of the things that's clearly difficult about this industry is that the pace of change is, if you'll pardon me here, is frantic. And so the things that we write about and talk about, and even the slides that you're going to see today as we move through the presentation, at some point in time you have to hit the save button and agree that the content is frozen the way it is, knowing full well that as time moves from the time the save button until even today, something has changed, something is different, perhaps even something is wrong with the information that's in the slides. But with that in mind, I want to go forward and move to the first slide. And Sandy is going to advance the slides on my behalf because the technology didn't link my presentation at my desktop to the webinar. So this is the story of the shifts in retail. And I had a conversation on the podium with one of the major retailers in the United States who run grocery and retail centers, and I said, look, if you see the shift in retail moving from 7 to 9% away from the brick and mortar store, and you see it moving toward 11%, and even some folks say as much as 15% by 2018, as a retailer, you're either terrified or you're extraordinarily motivated in order to adopt to the pace of change from the retail, traditional brick and mortar store to the spend that occurs outside the brick and mortar store. And yet if you look at the third bullet, the top retailers, the most successful folks, are seeing increases of 19% in transition away from the traditional retail to the new retail or to the new e-commerce. That's a stunning shift in volume. It impacts the store, it impacts the storefront, and clearly that shift changes the dynamic of how much and how often and from where the replenishment for the retail store has to occur, and then from where and how fast and how much it costs to ship that transition freight from the fulfillment center to the delivery location as specified by the buyer. And if we can look at the priorities, which is the next slide, the real issue, and you can talk about this in a broad context across the logistics industry. And when I talk to people about ports, and when I talk to people about automotive industry, we talk about the e-commerce industry, the critical component for a site, for a facility, for a location, even for a community's economic development is being able to produce a predictable outcome. And you can look at several locations around the United States today and say the reason these locations are more successful than other locations is because there's a logistics infrastructure and a transportation infrastructure that provides predictability, an outcome that is predictable. You want that at the storefront. You want that in the relationship between the distribution center and the retail, and you want that in the relationship between the buyer and the fulfillment center, wherever that fulfillment center happens to be, and we'll talk about that shortly. But it's this notion of the landed costs, the amount of time it takes to get, and the amount of cost it takes to get from point A in the supply chain to point B, from the time you click the mouse that says, I want to buy this, until the delivery driver knocks on your door. That's the first promise that has to align with what's on the retailer's website. And it's that promise that is driving the conversation at the retail board room about our deployment strategy, about our logistics strategy, about our technology strategy, and ultimately about our real estate strategy. And that's where our company is involved. IMS Worldwide is involved in a lot of the conversations about what does the promise mean for one-day delivery, two-day delivery, three-day delivery, or longer delivery in terms of real estate, and how do you compress that relationship between the click and the knock? And it's that conversation that is extraordinarily expensive. It's very technology intensive. And if you're trying to get into the position where you're offering free shipping, then it is also very much about understanding the logistics system that moves the freight between point A and point B. So the next slide shows really this sort of evolution of this industry in transition. I wrote out the click-to-knock cycle, and I cannot find a better way to describe this relationship between the buyer at the e-commerce site, wherever it is, in your pajamas at the middle of the night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, at the shop, or at lunch. But this whole cycle is about the click-to-pick, and that's what happens when the order is placed and a decision is made by the retailer where they're going to pick that order. The picking activity is what happens inside the warehouse, and it's the first part of the movement of the good between the buy and the buyer, or the seller and the buyer. The click-to-pick is the amount of time it takes to filter the order through the distribution network. And if it's one distribution center, that's easy to do. If it's 2 distribution centers, it's more complicated, because I always want to shorten or compress the distance between the place the order is picked and the place the order is shipped, which takes us to the next piece, which is the pick to ship. That cycle time is the length of time. Nope, I'm sorry, not yet, Sandy. So that cycle time is the pick to ship, and that is the amount of time it takes to move the picked order to the shipping center or to the shipping location, process the order and get it ready to ship, package it, And then finally the ship to door, which is the piece that is where a lot of businesses are struggling with loss of volume in their shopping carts, abandonment of shopping carts because the expectation for shipping is really a challenge. Two words fall off this slide that are important. That is get local or getting local. And that's the challenge that the industry has is if you're going to compress the time between the order placement and the order delivery, the only way to get that done is to have your inventory deployed locally so that you can fulfill that promise of 1 day or 2 day, because you cannot fulfill that on a national basis for one location. And therefore your promise has to be adjusted to show the dynamic. So if you just look at the tension between the time frame between the click to knock and the tension between that and free shipping, a lot of folks will accept the slower delivery time for free or lower cost shipping. A lot of customers, as much as 83% of customers, say they'll wait an additional 2 days if they get free shipping. And so, putting those sorts of filters into your decision process and into your logistics strategy and into your shopping cart buildup makes a difference in terms of whether or not you have a high rate of abandonment of the shopping cart or a lower rate of abandonment. And also you have to look at what people buy. In terms of categories of purchase, books and music and movies seem to be at the highest of the categories that people purchase. Apparel and shoes and toys and games follow, and obviously in the pure consumer business to consumer market, office supplies and products fall fairly low on the equation. But in the pure B2B, that segment has significant volume and drives a lot of decision processes. Now, if we move to the fulfillment options, Sandy. So in the logistics business, in the logistics industry, we look at this as sort of the cornerstone for what will occur as a result of a decision. And if you look at these options, there are companies that are extraordinarily successful with one national fulfillment center from a single location. Companies you would recognize who have a facility in Columbus, Ohio, or in Atlanta, or in a DFW in some cases, and they're very successful at shipping from a single location. Other companies have decided to go to multiple locations. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. And there are folks that make a good living doing business defining how a network should look in terms of where the fulfillment and the distribution centers should be. But that's based purely on retail, and if you add in fulfillment for e-commerce, it dramatically changes that location choice and location requirement. And then obviously if you're shipping from a small fulfillment location relative to fresh, that's the ultimate of the get local strategy, where I need to have material on a shelf that can be shipped this afternoon or tomorrow morning. I can't do that in a large metro area from 300 miles away. It just cannot work. And then the more interesting conversation is the fourth bullet, the ship from stores. And to use the stores as a fulfillment center requires a significant amount of technology capability and prowess. And it also requires a good visibility of inventory at the store shop, at the store center. Because the triage of trying to find the blue shirt and the matching tie to be picked as an order from the local Macy's or Dillard's store that is shipped to the consumer around the corner for the next day by UPS or by FedEx ground, you can erase an awful lot of profit by having 4 or 5 people looking for the goods if they're not where they're supposed to be on the shelf inside the store as a fulfillment center. And then obviously the notion of shipping to stores for pickup is highly used. shipping to stores for fulfillment locker. It has been tried in several markets with varying success. And then we looked at the shipment from vendors. The last one is what I call marketplace partners, because many of the retailers who run a virtual like Amazon, or who run a combined like Barnes & Noble, ship from their marketplace partners. They host the transaction and the billing activity and prompt the marketplace partner to fulfill the order from their own third-party location or from the warehouse. So you can see the complexities of the process of fulfillment, and these decisions are all ultimately about a location. So move to the next slide about the distributed fulfillment locations. In this context, I refer to Amazon because they've set the benchmark for a number of activities, and when you think through the click to buy until the order is picked, and that process is compressed down to 2.5 hours, and from their 68 fulfillment centers, they can promise to meet same, next, or second day, or 3 to 5 day delivery, depending on the bulk of the shipment. Think through the technology that's required to compress that activity down to 2.5 hours from the click to where the order is going to be determined to be processed, and where the order is going to be tendered to UPS or FedEx or other carriers for shipping. Obviously, there's a difference between the folks that run the virtual stores and the brick and mortar. The investment is different. The profile is different. And so when you look at the pure e-commerce folks like Amazon, again, their strategy is different than the fulfillment center. But in the white paper that we wrote, if you haven't read it, I would refer you to several case studies that we did. And there are examples in there of companies that operate a single distribution center, multiple distribution centers, use a third party in several locations, and then obviously some companies that have said we don't want to be in the business of running our own technology and trying to keep pace with the changes in technology alone. And one company that we cited has been growing at 160% year over year for the last couple of years. And they've done that purely by aligning themselves with Amazon as their fulfillment partner, their technology partner, and their inventory partner. And they have seen solid growth based on that kind of relationship. So the options are plenty. The next one is about shipping costs. Dimensional weight, if you're not familiar with it, is the real story about the devil's in the details. And I put an example here of how dimensional weight is calculated. It's height times length times width divided by 166, or an equation of dividing by 194. And let me just tell you, a 20 by 20 by 20 box at the new dimensional weight is 48 pounds, would be treated as 48 pounds regardless of the weight, where in the past equation of that same 20 by 20 by 20 box would be treated as 41 pounds under the old rule, which was at 194 as the divisor. So there's a 7-pound difference in the charge that would be agreed to in the shipping system by FedEx and UPS based on the dimensional weight. The rather simplistic box of example of a 5-pound paper towel that shipped from an e-commerce center could be charged as much as 15 to 20 pounds now based on dimensional weight, because the carriers will charge based on the greater of the dimensional weight versus the actual weight of the package. Now this usually applies on packages that are over 3 feet or 3 cubic feet. But again, the devil's in the details. If you're in the business and you're trying to control or manage your costs, the shipping costs are extraordinarily critical. And we'll move to the next slide, because not only are costs critical, but distance also matters. And in the book we described, in our white paper, we described why the locations matter. And it's really about understanding or looking at or thinking about the last time you cut down a tree or looked at a tree or a log and for your fireplace and said, you know, the rings of the tree are very much like the way UPS and FedEx charge for their shipment. The closer to the center, the closer to the distribution center, the less distance the box travels, the lower the cost. The longer the distance travels in their system, the more distance you are to the outer rings of the tree, the greater the distance to the cost. And so that may be a part of the decision process to multiply the number of locations in order to access lower cost and a shorter distance, because with lower cost also is shorter distance, and therefore you can move your strategy toward a shorter and shorter compression between the click and the mouth. The next slide shows you the traditional supply chain in graphic form. And we took out a lot of custodians. We took out a lot of people in the supply chain. And we took out all the management of the supply chain. And we took out all the graphics about the financial activities in the supply chain. And we took out all the activities about the information that has to trade between the partners in the supply chain to show you what a supply chain looks like, simplified from a manufacturing center through a transportation mode, to a distribution center, through another transportation mode, to a store, until you end up with a shopping cart where you buy that activity. That's the traditional retail shopping center. The next slide shows you this notion of an omni-channel or a multi-channel. Omni-channel and multi-channel are just iterations of each other. Basically, the multi-channel is I can buy from a store, from a catalog, from a smartphone, from a pop-up, and I can get fulfillment on an omni-channel. Basically, I'm taking that one of the further, and I say I can buy from any channel and I can receive through any channel. So I can buy in a store, or I can buy on a kiosk, and I can receive through any one of 5 or 6 or 7 different delivery options. But here's a picture of the multi-channel or the omni-channel fulfillment, and basically it just inserts the delivery vehicle to one of 3 options: to a locker, to a store where you would go pick it up, or directly to the house. And then the next slide is an eye roller. And for you guys that are out there that look at this slide and say, "What the heck does that mean?" Well, let's break this down. The last time I looked, Amazon has 68 warehouses around the United States, anywhere from 300,000 to 500,000 to 1 million square feet. They fulfill and make their promises based on an algorithm that lets them look at the inventory and the order and the delivery destination and the cost of shipping and the notion of free versus prime shipping, and they figure out where they're going to pick that order from and ship it to you from one of those locations or from several of those locations. The 4, however, is another retailer, a very large national retailer, who has deployed 3 out of their 4 new e-commerce million-square-foot facilities around the United States. And from those 4 e-commerce facilities, they will be able to reach, and I'll show you the graphic in a minute, the entire population of the United States, save a small number of people in North Dakota, within 2 to 3 days. Now, they choose to do that with 4 million-square-foot warehouses versus the 68 that Amazon has deployed. But the 840 is really about Macy's, because just this year they launched a complete fulfillment strategy to use 840 stores supplemented by several warehouses as fulfillment centers. And so they now are able to pick the product from the store, move it downstairs to a shipping center, closest to the zip code for delivery, have UPS, FedEx, or another ground delivery agent come by and pick that freight up and deliver it either that afternoon or the next day from 840 stores. Well, they've managed to match the strategy, the delivery promise of an Amazon with virtually no new investment in industrial real estate. They've done it purely by understanding that if they're good at inventory and good at order management, they can fulfill from stores. you can see how completely different the strategies are, and yet, they've chosen, the folks that are in this equation have chosen to deploy. The next slide shows you a picture of the map where Amazon has their facilities and the population clusters. The next slide shows you the 4 locations where the largest retailer in the United States has 3 of their 4 locations, and we think Phoenix or LA would give you essentially the same coverage. But if you look at the red and the purple in that context, that's next day and second day. This is for FedEx priority. FedEx has a slower delivery that would allow you to pick even a slower motion. But if you look at the red and the purple, and for those 4 locations, that retailer can cover the entire United States population within 2 to 3 days. That's a substantial difference from the strategy of having 68 warehouses. And the difference is the promise. The difference is really the promise of the pace of delivery from the time the order is placed until it's fulfilled. And then obviously Macy's with their multitude of stores. Let's go to the next slide because I want to move a little quickly here through the last part of this. The growth of commerce. I talked about that a little bit at the beginning, but I want to just come back and reference the challenge that e-commerce presents in terms of logistics, in terms of site requirements, site selection requirements, in terms of warehouse configuration, in terms of the hours of operation for a warehouse, in terms of staff requirements, and in terms of changes in transportation. Each one of these items really is a study of its own. And when I look at site selection requirements, the notion of being near a mass transit or a semi-mass transit system is critical, where I can get people to my facility by train or by bus rather than having to figure out how to park 600 cars per shift and then rotate those through 3 shifts. The parking alone is another real estate challenge for the new e-commerce facilities, where 600 to 1,000 people inside that facility each shift is not really much of that's a typical facility. And the next slide shows you some of the opportunities for growth. And this is a JLL study. Thanks to those guys for giving us an amazingly interesting graphic. But that's the demand, and that was in January of this year, so it's fairly fresh information. And it shows the amount of growth that is occurring as a result of of e-commerce and e-commerce demand, and the opportunities that retailers see to capture market sectors and to capture customers. The difference is obviously in the building, more parking, mezzanine build-outs, and automation, robotic picking, robotic activities. It's difficult to retrofit old buildings, and obviously, the labor alone in a facility like this is a stunning amount of volume. The next slide shows a simple forecast for U.S. online retail and the compounded annual growth through 2017. Very simple slide that shows that there's a lot of belief that this industry has substantial legs. And if you go to the next slide, it shows the global growth. And this is the context for why we said, the globe is where the opportunity is. And this is the other promise really is the opportunity to grow a global footprint. And you can see the amount of growth projected across the globe, and the amount of change that is expected to occur. And then a couple of slides to go here, and we'll wrap up. But the next slide shows the number of users. And this isn't buyers, this is users, but it still shows you the opportunity. If you're a retailer in the U.S. and you look at this number and you say the world represents 3 times, 4 times the amount of opportunities, these are people who I can reach if I can figure out how to manage my logistics and transportation and to reach these people. There's real growth opportunity. In the U.S. retail, the storefront grows 1 or 2%, maybe 3% in a good year. If you have 10 or 15% growth in your e-commerce strategy, and then you look at this graphic alone and say I can grow 20, 30% if I can figure out how to go global, that's where the real promise for growth is, and that's the second promise in what we wrote about. The next slide is the challenge slide, the challenges of going international. And there are several competent technology solutions that can be bolted to the back end of an e-commerce fulfillment center, but they all have to accommodate that one notion that I put in on the slide early on, and that's a total landed cost, because in order to check out successfully in an e-commerce environment, I've got to be able to have a solution, a technology solution that gives me landed cost with taxes, duties, customs, product classifications, all loaded, and transportation, all loaded to the destination country where the buyer is. And that's very complex because you've got to be able to put in filters for each country's product classification, duty requirements, customs requirements, and then getting into the returns is where it gets really interesting, and even payment methods and protection schemes. So there's some daunting work to be done by the person who says, I want to take advantage of that promise and grow my business, but it's not for the faint of heart. It is a real challenge, and you layer in there customer returns and complaints and refunds. It's challenging. Our friends at Amazon have created a Fulfillment by Amazon program that addresses this, because it lets you bring goods to them under their FBA banner, and basically you can reach the globe under their umbrella. They will do all the order management, the product payment, the fulfillment, the currency fluctuation changes, the payment methods, the technology, and they'll even build in a return program. And some of the FBA users in 2014 showed a 20% growth in their international business. So that opportunity is there. There are companies that are experiencing that growth now. And Amazon isn't the only one in that space, but Amazon is clearly out front with their Fulfillment by Amazon. So finally, the last slide is about what most of you probably really want to know, which is what's Alibaba to, and what are they going to do, and how will that change the landscape of e-commerce again? And we've seen it change multiple times in the last few years. And there's clearly a difference between the strategies that Amazon and Alibaba will have in place. You can see the scale of Alibaba's activity in 2014. You can see the scale of the transaction platform that they manage. And I will tell you that the initial intelligence about Alibaba is that their real intent is to be able to reach and conduct business with the 50 million Chinese citizens who live abroad. That alone is a significant opportunity. They will also become a conduit through which the Chinese consumer will be able to access U.S. goods in a safe, secure environment. We expect that they will have a different strategy on the real estate than Amazon, and they will push the real estate and product benefit out to a third party or a fourth party, and Alibaba and their Alipay will conduct the transaction, host the payment, and then prompt the fulfillment to be delivered to a consolidation point in the U.S. will be consolidated for delivery with other products within their system to destinations, and then taking them back apart and distributed in country by either a third party or a fourth party. So it's a very complex map. It's a very interesting map. It's a map that will continue to change. It's a map for the real estate decision maker that is not simple, but it's also a time where companies that get it right have an opportunity to have significant new income, significant new revenue streams, and access to a significant new retail customer. With that, I will end my conversation. Sandy, I think we have a few minutes for a question. I'm from Texas, so we're allowed to cuss and discuss when it comes to questions. And we'll have that context in this part of the format. My email is on the slide that's in front of you, so you can feel free to send me a question offline, or if you send it through the webinar to Sandy, she will send them to me. The ones that don't get answered today, I will answer and get back. So thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening for 40 minutes. We'll have a few questions, and then Sandy can wrap this up.
Yep, thank you, Steve. Yep, we have a few questions. Are there certain types of retailers who are more apt to do their own fulfillment versus outsourcing to a 3PL? For example, is a clothing provider more likely to outsource fulfillment than an electronics provider? Well,
a lot of, and I'll point back to the white paper because we laid out in there the company who had invested heavily in their own technology and their own e-commerce platform, their own .com, and the overhead to run that. It was a clothing company. If I said the name of the company, everybody would know who they are. But they looked at the cost of standing up their own fulfillment center, their own fulfillment operation, their own fulfillment apparatus, their own inventory management, their own payment system, their own technology, and the overhead to run that. And they said, look, it's just easier to give the inventory, send the inventory in China to Amazon, send the inventory in Mexico for Amazon, send the inventory to 5 or 6 warehouses around the U.S. for Amazon. They're better at it. They have better scale. They have better transportation, buying power. They have better technology than we'll ever get as a small company. Our business is making clothes for the sector that we work in. We're very good at that, but we're not particularly good at doing what Amazon has proven they can do better than we can do. Now, I would say that the clothing retailer, when I looked at the products that are bought and sold on e-commerce, books and music and movies, apparel and shoes and toys and games are the top of the list. And I would say those folks are more likely to get into the business and be successful, whether or not they choose to go it on their own or go through a third party or align with multiples. Because if you go online today looking for a particular barbecue grill, which we do in Texas, I can find 5 different places to buy that same grill at different prices with different promises of fulfillment. But it's exactly the same grill made by the same one company, but they're fulfilling it through 5 or 6 different ways. Or I can go direct to them, or I can go to my Home Depot or my Lowe's next door and have it delivered. So the notion of omni-commerce is, I can buy it from anywhere. I can have it shipped from anywhere. I can have it brought to me from anywhere, and I can do it anytime I want. And that's where we're trying to go. I think that's where most of the retailers see the industry. Getting there, however, is extraordinarily challenging, and it's individual to, the answer to the question, what's your promise to the customer?
Right, okay. How is the movement towards more local distribution centers and inventory storage affecting the type of industrial product desired? Are we going to see a shift towards smaller distribution centers, for example, 100,000 square foot buildings instead of 500,000 square foot buildings?
Well, think abandoned small grocery stores in 7 or 8 locations around the Metroplex. And there's the answer. Those are 100,000 square foot. They probably have some sort of a legacy storage, freezer, cold chain system. 100,000 is a good size for one of those. They've got dock access. There's some of those already being bought up because that local promise needs to have that facility, and it certainly doesn't need to be a 500,000 square foot, which is A, impossible to build, and B, impossible to buy, and probably would never get entitled in most of the major metros, but there's a lot of other facilities that can be easily converted into that local delivery node for that last mile.
Okay. Of the 60 tenants out in the market, are the majority looking for single tenant build-to-suits or 3PLs that will service multiple clients, etc.? Also, are the tenants looking to rent or to own?
I didn't go that far with the documentation from the study that I reviewed, but I would say that most of the 60 tenants are fulfillment. They're not in the typical locations, and many of those will be operated by a 3PL, a global 3PL, or a global freight forwarder. But again, model, there's no one answer to this question, and I apologize. But the difference, the strategy really is, does the e-commerce .com have the scale to use a full million square footer, and is one of those enough, or do they rely on a 3PL as they grow their business in several of these, and the 3PL has enough scale with 4 or 5 users under the umbrella to take on several of those buildings and run the fulfillment on behalf of the third party? Or if you look at Alibaba and you say, well, they're going to push their third party to a facility like that. The question of rent and own, that's even a more challenging. If you look at Amazon, they own buildings in some really unusual places. If they decide to move out of that building, in some cases that's the biggest building within 20, 30 miles of where they are. If there's not other e-commerce user prospect behind it, it could be difficult and challenging to lease that. So again, it's not a one-answer question, Sandy. And if the person who asked that question has a conversation offline, to dig into that with you.
Okay. Another question. Please comment on what percentage of new fulfillment center space might be 1 million square feet versus local fulfillment center and former grocery store of 100,000 square feet.
Ask the question again, please.
It says, please comment on what percentage of new, it says FC, so I assume that's fulfillment center square space, might be 1 million square feet versus local fulfillment center and former grocery store of 100,000 square feet.
Well, the graphic was, I think there's 60 tenants looking for 1 million square feet at the beginning of this year. Down under that radar, I don't know that anybody knows how many of the local facilities are being either bought up or leased up, or smart people who understand where this industry is going are looking at the opportunity that may be investing in some of those properties. I don't know that anybody knows the answer to the question as to how many of those local facilities are in play or being acquired or being considered to be acquired based on the notion that the promise of tomorrow for your groceries is an expectation that all the consumers in the marketplace, or enough consumers in the marketplace, are going to embrace in order to make that a viable project. And I don't think the ink is dry on that conversation yet in terms of that math to make that work.
Okay. That's all we have for questions. Thanks for a great presentation, Steve, and giving us an overview of your research report and the many ways retailers are attempting to meet evolving customer expectations. If you have additional questions for Steve, his contact information is listed on the current slide. Please fill out the short survey that will follow. Thank you for attending our session and have a good day.